The United Nations is calling for a humanitarian pause to the fighting with ISIS in Raqqa, Syria, so civilians can evacuate. U.S.-backed forces began an offensive against the group's self-declared capital back in June. The UN estimates 20,000 people are trapped and at risk. ISIS released a new propaganda video that claims to show a 10-year-old American boy. U.S. officials now tell CBS News that clues in this video seem to indicate that this little boy is an American. But the details of how he ended up with ISIS are still not clear. The boy makes threats against the U.S. that appear to be scripted.
Our ongoing series called Issues That Matter explores the pressing challenges our country faces. And today we're taking a closer look at our nation's fight against ISIS. The State Department says ISIS has lost about 78% of its territory in Iraq and 58% in Syria since its peak in 2014. Nearly one-third of those losses have happened in the past 6 months. Brett McGurk is the special presidential envoy for the global coalition to counter ISIS. He's served now under 3 administrations and just returned from a 12-day trip to the Middle East. Brett, good to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
So I know you were just in Iraq. Tell us what you learned.
Well, I was in Iraq and Syria. Had the honor of traveling with Secretary Mattis into Jordan and also Iraq. But about a week ago, I was just north of Raqqa, where we heard about this report. Look, I think we have to keep things in perspective. About 7 months ago in Raqqa, ISIS was sitting in a major city, using the infrastructure of a city to plan huge attacks against the United States and our partners. That was happening only 6 or 7 months ago. Right now, they're fighting for their life block by block. About 60% of the city has now been cleared. It is extremely, extremely difficult, and we're mindful of this report about potential humanitarian casualties. And let me say 2 things. We talked to a number of the IDPs who've come out of Raqqa, about 300,000 now.
What are IDPs?
Displaced people, people who fled the fighting. All these people in Raqqa who are fleeing ISIS, they're fleeing into the lines of the force that we're working with, and we are now working with the United Nations to try to take care of them. About 20,000 people remain left in Raqqa. What they tell us is that the #1 thing we have to do to help these people is defeat ISIS. ISIS is using civilians as human shields. They're using a children's hospital in Raqqa as their primary base of operations. So the #1 thing we have to do is defeat them and defeat them as soon as we can. And it's going well. So
given the gains over the last 6 months while President Trump has been in office, how has the strategy changed since President Obama?
Well, when President Trump came in, he said, look, he charged the entire national security team, focus like a laser on destroying ISIS. So that meant let's look at what is working and try to reinforce those efforts, and let's look at things maybe that haven't worked and try to improve them. One thing he did very early on was delegate authorities down to the lowest level in the field. What that means in practice is that as our military experts see an opportunity, they can seize it. So the reason we're 60% through Raqqa now is because we saw an opportunity about 4 or 5 months ago at a town of Topka. I was just in this town here about a week ago. It's over a body of water. It took a major audacious military maneuver to do that. We saw the opportunity, delegated authorities to the field, helped us take advantage of that. An operation launched within a week, and we're able to catch ISIS by surprise, which really helped set the conditions for getting into Raqqa. So you delegate authorities down, you shorten the decision-making cycle, it makes a difference in the field. We also are making sure that our coalition is really participating in this effort. So I saw with my own eyes, just north of Mosul, and I think it's important for your viewers to understand what these brave Americans are doing in the field. I was in a town called Tel Skuf, where a Navy SEAL gave his life about a year ago fighting ISIS, helping the Kurdish Peshmerga fight ISIS. In that town today, about 80% of the population is returned. They're restoring their community. And we are helping with the coalition to try to make sure that landmines are cleared, water can get back and running, electricity is back. And I saw with my own eyes as these families come back to these towns that only 6 or 7 months ago were controlled by ISIS. So I think
what you're saying, Brett, sounds very encouraging. And then we see that video that they're claiming is, claiming is an American boy, little boy. And they're describing him as an ISIS cub, such a cute name for such an ugly philosophy. When you see something like that, do you believe it? What do you make of it?
Well, let me say, look, the leader of ISIS is a guy named Bakr al-Baghdadi. He claims to be the caliph of this territory in Iraq and Syria.
And there were reports that he had been killed.
He's losing all of his territory. We haven't heard from him since December, and instead they're putting out videos of children. I cannot, obviously, I can't confirm this video or who this child is. They use children as human shields. They try to recruit children as suicide bombers. They have used children inside Iraq to blow up children's soccer games, to attack ice cream parlors of families going to celebrate the Eid. That's what this organization is. And that's why the sooner it can be defeated, the better. So we are moving as fast as we possibly can, mindful of how difficult this is.
But the latest attack against the West wasn't staged from Iraq or Syria. It was from a village in Spain. So the global game of whack-a-mole with these guys, how is that affected by the efforts on the battlefield?
So, Bill, it's a great question, because our focus in Iraq and Syria, their self-proclaimed caliphate, where they used to sit and plan and plot all these attacks. That's where they planned Brussels, that's where they planned Paris, that's where they were planning against us. We have to shrink their territory. At the same time, through a global coalition, we built a global coalition now of 69 countries, and working to share information. As we collect data off the battlefield of who these people are, we're putting them into a global database.
Gives you information that you can figure out where the cells are?
The key to stopping these attacks is information sharing. So the overall effort will shift a little bit from the military phase in Iraq and Syria to law enforcement, intelligence, and sharing information. One of the newest members of our coalition is actually Interpol, because we're building a global database. We have 19,000 names now of known terrorists who either joined ISIS or tried to join ISIS, trying to move into Iraq and Syria. And we want to make sure that every law enforcement agency, every Border Patrol officer can check a database and stop these people in a routine traffic stop as they're trying to cross borders. This is the long-term effort, the long-term fight in information sharing, trying to close a net globally to make sure these people can't travel. And we're just as focused on that as we are on the military side in Iraq and Syria.
When you say long-term, I think everybody wants to know how long is long. But when Norah said you're just back from Iraq, literally just back, you just got back last night. Just got back.
I did. I got back last night. You know, it was interesting, even in Iraq. I was in Saudi Arabia before going to Iraq, and some interesting things going on in that part of the world. Iraq and Saudi Arabia have really not had any diplomatic relations since 1990. I visited the Iraq-Saudi border crossing, was just open for the first time in 27 years. There's a rapprochement going on between those two countries, which will be very helpful in terms of the post-ISIS phase, making sure that these guys can never come back and that we have some stability there.
I'm thinking you need to come back to the table at another time.
So much to talk about.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so
McGurk,
much.
our thanks to you.